Yeah.
So for people that hear me to be entertaining, I ought to tell a story. LJ, what story should I tell? Look at the idea list.
Oh, you have an idea list.
Yeah, I've got an idea list.
Hi, Rachel Cruz. Alex Thomas is here as well. Happy ThursdAGE unto thee.
I wanted you to do it on your phone. I guess you don't have it.
My phone is dead.
Okay.
I've got the we are live.
Oh, I've told that story before, but yeah, I can tell that story. All right, so this is a story I've told before on YouTube, and I'll do the short version while we wait to see if we go live on.
Oh, we're live.
Oh, we're live. You're all spared from the bloody murder.
No, sir. I'm sorry. You are out of luck. I mean, or we're in luck, but no, you gotta.
I gotta tell the bloody murder story. All right.
The bloody murder story. Yes.
This is the bloody murder story, and I've told this before on my YouTube video page, so you can look for the long version there. I will do the short version. I get nosebleeds when I sleep. Not nearly as much now that I have a CPAP and some medication and some stuff, but it used to happen regularly, especially anytime the weather changed. And my wife was aware before we got married that I had nosebleeds, but what she was not aware is that nosebleeds when I was asleep would not necessarily wake me up. Oh. And it did not occur to me to tell her that nosebleeds did not necessarily wake me up, because I thought everybody's nosebleeds did not necessarily wake them up. So a few days after our marriage, I apparently got a nosebleed in my sleep, and it didn't wake me up. So it soaked into the pillow, and it soaked onto my face, and it soaked into my beard. Okay, I slept through it, but I started to snore, sort of a gurgling snore. And my wife woke up, saw something glistening on the pillow, reached out to touch it, and saw that my face was covered in blood. So she started to scream. So I wake up because my wife is screaming, and her hand is covered in blood. So I start screaming. So I'm going, ah! And she's going, ah! 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 And so I just sit there screaming. Now, she thought an axe murderer had snuck in during the night, hit me in the head, killing me, and then wandered off. I thought her hand was covered in blood, and so that she had badly cut herself. Maybe the mirror over our mantelpiece had broken. Maybe a knife killer had slashed her hand, or cat had gone cannibal. I don't know. So we're screaming here for a good minute and a half, just ah, 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 ah. And I finally go,
so
what's
good.
wrong? And she says, you're covered in blood. I said, I thought that was your blood. And she's like, no, that's your blood. And I was like, oh, that's just a nosebleed. That's normal. And my wife went to some effort to express to me how not normal it was to wake up with someone covered in blood. That wasn't typical. She was hitting me with a pillow and screaming at me that I needed to warn her about these things. And that is the story of bloody murder, how my wife thought I had been killed in the middle of the night and had my severed head left on her pillow as a warning to others.
Well, that reminds me of a quick story I want to tell, but it's very quick. Well, one time I went with a bunch of friends, and we got an Airbnb, and somebody had brought, from my home, they brought a rubber unicorn mask. Somebody, I don't know who, but they, I grabbed it and I stuffed it full of towels, and I laid it on the bed of one of the people who were sleeping, and then I made it look like it was a severed unicorn head with some ketchup, and they screamed too. So it was quite enjoyable. That's the kind of fun I bring. I love Rachel Cruz was like, romance. Very good stuff. I for one love that story, but I love what we're doing today. So we're talking about we've got this series, and we're going through all of the Fantasy Age books, and I'm learning a ton. People have lots of great questions, and we're really getting into it. And today it is the Fantasy Age Campaign Builder's Guide. Okay. And so what we'll do is I'm going to share the screen here, and we'll OWen will walk us through all of the magic of this campaign builder's guide. There we go. Let's make sure it's not too There we go. Sure, why not? Love it. As we go through this today, folks, feel free to drop in questions. Let us know what what things that you want to talk about, and we'll dig into it. OWen, where shall we go first?
So I want to talk a little bit about the purpose of this product before we go into a lot of detail.
Sweet.
Because this is a little different from what some people are expecting when a game comes out. It is very, very typical for a class level and species based fantasy role playing game to have a core rule book which tells you about how to make characters and all your classes and all of that, and then a monster book or a bestiary which gives you all of your monsters, and Fantasy Age follows that. And then most people expect a game master's guide, something that tells a game master how to game master things. And Fantasy Age didn't go that direction. We did do the Game Master's Kit, which we've talked about before, which has the GM screen and the handouts. But the Campaign Builder's Guide is something a little more specific and useful and attuned specifically to Fantasy Age and how Fantasy Age works. And one of the things about Fantasy Age is that there's a lot of stuff you can do with Fantasy Age by changing some of the options to make a totally different game feel. And we go into that some in the Fantasy Age Companion, which we've also discussed in this series. But this is the book where we get into how to integrate those things so much. And I think not only is it a great Fantasy Age book, I think it's one of the best Fantasy Age books, and I had nothing to do with it, so I can say that without feeling embarrassed. But I also think it's a book that has a lot of advice that just people who like to run fantasy role-playing games could pick up and benefit from, on themes and variants and designing deities. It's got a lot of stuff that people tend not to delve into much. And it is being noted, of course, on our stream that some of our people currently with us have been involved in the writing. So I think it's nice that we have that combination of factors. So that's the setting. That's the setup. That's why it's there for. And I want people to be looking at everything else we talk about in that context.
Awesome. Yeah, it is definitely a love fest in the chat. People are talking. Rachel is here talking about as a contributor to this, and folks are very excited. So welcome, and I almost feel like someday we should invite Rachel to come hang out with us.
We really should, right? I mean,
yeah.
If you go to, you can go to the first actual page rather than the cover and see writing and design. Gary Asselford, who's someone I've worked with before and know quite
Gary?
well. Yeah.
What? I know Gary. That's crazy. That's great. I mean, that's fantastic.
Walt, whose last name I have never heard pronounced, and I apologize if I get it wrong. Chichinowski, Rachel Cruz, Steve Kenson, Matt Miller, and Jamie Wood. So and developed by Jack Norris, who was the line developer before I came on. So, editing by Liz Liddell. I didn't know that. I've never looked at that editing line before, and now I'm embarrassed because
Liz is great. Phenomenal. Just amazing. Yeah, this whole list. This is a power-packed group of
it really is.
TTRPG royalty, shall I say? Love it. Okay, so power-packed group of people making contributions to this. We've got, here we are at the table of contents. Do you want to talk a bit about that, or just roll into the introduction?
I want to talk about the table of contents briefly.
Yes.
Since the people can see it. When you're looking at this, and you're seeing, the campaign framework, just that right there, that is the sort of thing that I don't see enough GM books talk about. Building the adventure talks about 3-act adventures, 5-act adventures, plot point adventures. We'll get into that. While we do talk about how to do those things with Fantasy Age, again, these are all things that you can take and put in any role-playing game. And I became a better game master by reading this book. So I wanted to touch on that. Locations, building characters, building rewards, building monsters and adversaries. Chapter 8, building the divine, which again is a thing I don't think gets talked about enough. Chapter 9, building subgenres, which is one of my favorite sections of this, even though it's pretty short. And then Chapter 10, building epic campaigns. So, and that hits things like epic locations, epic events, and dying gods. So just the table of contents of this already, when I was reading it the first time, gave me a real exciting idea of what was going to be in this book. And I did not read this book from page 1 to page 125. I hopped around. I went straight to Building the Divine because I was working on some Pantheon stuff at the time. So a lot of people get intimidated by books that are 100 or more pages. If you are a game master and you're looking at this book, this isn't just your table of contents. This is your roadmap. If you are already running a campaign you're happy with, right? So you don't need to worry about a framework. You don't need to worry about examples. You don't need to worry about building the adventures. You've got all that. You're not worried about encounters. But every time you try and give people things as rewards, they're like, oh, look, more silver pieces. We can't spend on everything. And they roll their eyes and it's disconcerting. Then you know, okay, what I want is to look at new ways to build rewards. And you can go straight to chapter 6 and look at that. So that is, I think a lot of people try and absorb things like this, either crunchy rules first, and there are crunchy rules in this, but that is not the main thrust of this book, or beginning to end. And in either case, I think for some people that will not be the right way to go through this book. So I just wanted to call that out.
That's amazing. And wow, this is really a kind of proven practice sort of school to get your stuff together, you know, when it comes to running Fantasy Age. My question for you, how, if I dive into this and I start page by page, or I use it as a reference, you know, just go directly to the place where I want to really kind of beef up what I'm doing, how applicable are the kinds of like this methodology? How applicable is it beyond Age or Fantasy Age?
I mean, you know, there's some stuff at the beginning that talks about like the notes on probabilities of getting stunt points and what the chances are you will get doubles if you're rolling 3d6 and the result is a 9 or a 12. That is obviously age specific, although those probabilities apply to any of the age systems. So, and there is a level of applicability here. There's sort of a base level that you can apply to anything, and then there's stuff that you can apply to any age game. So even if you're a fan of The Expanse or Blue Rose or Modern Age, there's stuff in here that you will be able to adapt very, very quickly. But then there is a bunch of stuff in here, entire chapters that have nary a crunchy rule and are all about ideas and concepts and backgrounds. So, and you can use those with anything. I've used them for Starfinder games, right? So looking at building the campaign framework, right, which starts on page 5 of the book. It talks about a framework being the foundation on which you build your adventure and overall campaign arc, and that acts like a skeleton on which the body of your campaign is built. And they talk about having a theme and knowing your players and saying yes to when your players want to do something or take something in a direction, or, you know, if they're like, hey, can we try to make things better in this orphanage that the little flower girl has been working out of, and we're worried about her because she doesn't seem to get enough food, and the GM can say, yeah, you can look into that, right? Maybe you can't make things better by kicking the door down because it's a legally operating orphanage, but you can see what the problems are, and that's a part of saying yes. It has some general advice, like starting with the end, and that may not be relevant to you, but like if you want to do a murder mystery or a chase or an investigation, anything where the players don't necessarily know what's going on at the beginning, the start with the end and work your way backwards and having a call to adventure, that's great advice. But it doesn't just have to be for mysteries. One of my favorite things is when a story has an ending that is spectacular and exciting and hard to get to, but not a surprise. Lord of the Rings, spoilers, in case you haven't read the 80-year-old Lord of the Rings books or seen the 20-year-old movies. In the first book, you're told, hey, you got to take this ring and throw it into Mordor, Mount Doom, and that will end Sauron. And that's what happens. A lot of stuff happens along the way.
Right.
This incredibly difficult thing, that again is an example of starting with the end. So if you wanted to do any story, you can say, okay, what is the big set piece I want at the end, right? Do I want at the end, do I want the 4 Ghostbusters standing on top of a building in New York City shooting at a creature that's asked them if they're gods? You start with that, and then you work backwards. You say, okay, well, then they're going to get this hint and this information. So that kind of advice in here can apply to any game system and even any genre. Then you get more fantasy specific stuff. If you move on to page 8, you've got campaign framework examples. So you can be mercenaries, or it can be high seas adventure. It can be the wasteland. And if you happen to go to page 9, it has a awesome piece of wasteland art that is clearly a post-apocalyptic fantasy setting that, rather than being a zombie apocalypse, appears to be a wall-climbing, spell-casting ghoul apocalypse, which makes things much worse. A game of Thieves, which obviously borrows from some of the things that Green Ronin has done for other game systems, like Song of Ice and Fire. And I don't want to go through all of these, but they also have advice for things like sandbox campaigns, so it doesn't have to be linear, that you might want to change frameworks. There are questions that you should ask your players, questions that you can ask yourself, campaign arcs that you can set up. And then after all of that, it does some specific framework examples. And you can either use these as starting places to run your game. So you can say, okay, a framework example is the mean streaks of Kavsak. That sounds interesting. It has this cool piece of art. City at the Crossroads sounds like a cool hook. I will build my campaign on this. And you can literally just lift these things and use them as elements that you can build your campaign on. Or yes.
Sorry, I'm laughing at this. Looking at this picture, it reminds me of something subtle. Sorry, you can see what I'm looking at, right?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, great. Am I imagining what I am seeing, or do I see what I'm seeing?
I actually don't see what you're seeing, so I don't know if you're imagining it or not.
Well, as I'm looking at this, I am reminded of a certain a Scooby-Doo like Scooby-Doo crowd.
No, you are not imagining that. Now that you say that, you are absolutely, and they're about to pull the mask off.
Right. He's like, I would have gotten away with it too if it weren't for you.
If it weren't for the Darn Adventurers, yeah.
Right.
A lot of things have been changed with those. It's not a straight rip, but no, you're absolutely right.
Doesn't it feel, I mean, chat, do you see that? Am I just a lunatic? Because that definitely...
Shaggy in particular is,
yeah,
but also the fact that the mask is about to get ripped off is,
exactly.
There's no doubt there, but that is so. I've talked about how much I love the Fantasy Age art before, and our art director Hal does an amazing job conceptually and getting the stuff put together. And Jack Norris may have put in the order for that piece, but that is a great visual to tell you, hey, do you have some favorite 80s cartoon for kids or book series, or is there something that you like how elements of it worked to drive the adventure? Well, you can take those elements, that idea, and translate it to a Fantasy Age or any other genre campaign. And with this one picture, they show you how that would work, right? The mask has been lifted off. You can see that the guy is actually a eye scarred. Presumably he's a real estate developer. And an entire plot is revealed in that one illustration without it ever having to be
great. Yeah. What's great is that Chris was on that before I was, for sure. I was, over on the share screen, but that is just really clever and very fun. I love those kinds of Easter egg moments, and we've got a little humor with the Green Ronin crew. We're not afraid to make some yokes.
Don't egg me on.
All right, so now we have uncovered that it was old Mr. Smithers all along as the, I don't know what, of the orc. Oh, rude. In the whatever with the whatever.
Yeah.
I love it. Okay, so now where shall we go next?
Go to Building the Adventure. It's page 17.
All right. So when I go to 7, I'm just going to triangulate our pages here. So this is what happens when I go to 17. So I probably want to. It's right here. That's great.
Yeah. So
I'm one ahead of you. Yeah.
Yeah. When I say 17, it means 18.
Okay.
Okay. So I'm not going to take a lot of time on this because I could just reiterate all this advice. And the advice is. It's right here. It's written down. So I'm just going to mention that it talks a lot about problems that crop up in having adventures and how to view your adventures and how to put them together, how to adapt to your players, what sort of format to use. One of the things I wanted to say is I've had people start to read this chapter and tell me, hey, it's talking about using adventures and having a campaign and one-shot adventures, and I know all that. Okay, great. You know all that. I had been running adventures for more than 30 years when I ran into this book. And there was nothing here that was new to me until I got deeper into the chapter. There's some stuff in designing adventures that specifically, and how much prep is enough, and idea of player volition influence. There's some stuff in there that I had never thought about the way this book suggests you think about it. So even if you run into a section of this book that you think, as a game master or campaign builder, I know all that advice, my recommendation is skim it. Read through the headers, right? If you see something says 5-act adventure, and you're like, well, what would a 5-act adventure look like? I've never thought about that. Then start to read that section. But this is just a lot of solid advice on story beats and encounters and important NPCs, all of that.
Wow.
And I love it, but I don't want to go over it on and on and on and on.
That's true. Yeah. At some point we ought to just have like a Green Ronin University and just run some courses off this, because this is great, especially when you get to hear about it through the context or the lens of a developer, of a designer. That's really, really, really powerful stuff. Very helpful. Some beautiful art.
So let's go on to chapter 3, which for you will start on page 32. Which
the real 32. There we go. Woo!
I again want to talk about this art. That appears to be a chimera made up of a bear, a bull, a bat, and a gecko. Now, maybe it's not a bat and a gecko. Maybe that's a dragon. But that is a critter that I have never seen before, and I've never seen stats before. But if someone told me to stat this, I would know immediately, okay, I want a multi-headed creature and I want a flying dragon-like creature. This is one of the things that as a game master you can do to keep people guessing, right? You can just say, hey, I'm going to take the stat box for a goblin, but instead of looking like a goblin, it is a 2-foot diameter spider wearing a fez that spins a little tiny silken spear. And the game stats are exactly as what they are for a goblin, and it's chittering at us, and it has a little web home. But as soon as the players run into spear-chucking, fez-wearing, gibbering spiders, all of their expectations are changed and set back, even though you as the GM did not have to do any work other than to imagine a new thing. Right? You don't have to stat it up. You don't. What?
Oh, I'm sorry. What chapter is it that explains what gibbering is? Like, is there like a sound sort of like know your creatures?
So that's from the Gibbering Mouther, which is a first edition AD&D monster. So it's
yucky.
just sort of it's an assumed level of knowledge at this point. Also, Lovecraft has gibbering and being noisome and disquieting. There's some terms that we like to use as game designers, and one of the things I've always loved about tabletop game design is that if you say orienteering or prestidigitation and people don't know what that means, or sigil or geas, they are encouraged to look it up. So you can whip out words that, especially with the age of the internet, it is easy for people to come up and learn about it.
That's great. Well, so I have for the chat, like if you could maybe type out what you think gibbering would sound like, and then we'll this is good. We will do, as Rachel Cruz says, the new Ronin game show. Name that sound. I do so love.
I can name that sound in 4 syllables.
In 4 syllables. Yeah. I am quite curious as to what gibbering could be. I've heard it many times. Ren says, real quick, I did want to do this. Owen, sorry to interrupt your flow, but I want to say hello to Stan. I want to say hello to Michael McNeil, who says, hey, folks, as well as our buddies, Master of the Game. They said, they love Fantasy Age, and that they were like, I should review this. Absolutely, you ought. And let me, if you are going to review this on your channel, if you don't have this already, I'm presuming you do. But if you do not, reach out. Let's play@greenronin.com. And if you're a reviewer, a streamer, or somebody who's going to be utilizing this in some public fashion, I'm happy to shoot you over a little digital PDF. And this is good. The next world building show with your judge, OWen and Troy. Yeah, I do think it's kind of a fun. I do think that's just kind of a fun opportunity for us to explore other game shows or facets of the ThursdAGE that we could do. Because I know you really do love when I go off book. You remain unflappable. So yeah.
To speak briefly on that, hey, reach out to us. We are doing this show, to build a community and talk to people and have a good time, but also to encourage people to buy books. So, because if you don't buy them, then we don't have the money to make them or to pay for the mortgage. So if you are a person who interviews people or has people on your own show or does reviews or does live play shows, I can't promise anything, but always feel free to reach out to Let's Play at greenronin.com and ask questions, pitch something, work with us, and we will see if we can help you help us.
Help us help you. Jason says, Troy's always off to book. I think you mean to say I'm off book. I am oft drunk. So that's
you're off book.
I'm off book. Very, very much so.
When you say often. All right, so let's get back to the book.
Let's do it.
Because I know I won't have gone all the way through it and we'll be out of time.
Yeah.
So, and someone pointed out that also on the art there on page 32 is the Beastmaster from the companion, right? That character on the right with the tiger and the tiger cloak. So it's...
Oh, the Beastmaster. Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
So it's a reappearance. All right. So... Chapter 3 is about building encounters. Much like the campaign one, I don't want to go into a whole lot of detail about it. It talks about different kinds of encounters. And one of the things that you will sometimes run into, especially with new GMs, is they will feel like every encounter has to have a thing for you to stab. In other words, there has to be an orc for you to kill so you can take his pie. So they want the orc and the pie. And that's just not necessary for every encounter. And so this goes through a lot of different options. Also talks about people avoiding encounters and how to end encounter and ways to come up with defining an encounter, designing it, defining the conflict, resolutions, unbalanced encounters, and when you want an intentionally unbalanced encounter. And that sort of side note, intentionally unbalanced encounters is the sort of thing that I just don't see get talked about enough in books that are trying to teach you to GM or to be a better GM. So
hey, real quick, I just want to say, I note that there is also in here a chase encounter, and I didn't realize that we've got chases in the chat right now. So yeah, I didn't read this paragraph. I have no idea what we're supposed to do with that.
Well, it says that what makes chase encounters interesting isn't the thrill of pursuit. So be aware that having chase here, it's not the thrill of pursuit that makes chase exciting.
That is a very, very good point. Cover it.
All right.
We've done it. All right.
Pardon me. And it talks about mapping and resolving the conflict, etc. Moving on to chapter 4, which will be on page 44 for you, Troy.
Bloop.
Building locations. I've seen a lot of manuals and GMs and advice talk about mapping locations and about creating locations for interesting fights, right? But when you look at this illustration, and again, just looking at the illustration, you have here what appear to be a couple of player characters. There's no fight going on, and it looks like a temple to the wolf. And there appear to be both wolf people or maybe werewolves, but also someone just wearing a wolf ear cloak in the pews, and it's not a fight. And when I look at this, I just immediately think, I have players who just go nuts if they were wandering around in the woods and there was a big stone structure and it turned out to be a temple of the wolf for people who worship wolfishness. And there were wolf people inside and you could just have a conversation with them. That's the sort of thing that the people I play with and have been role-playing with for 30 years in many cases, just they sink their teeth into it and they go nuts.
Yeah, I think we've got some of those folks in the channel as well. So
yeah. Totally. So this tells you that there are ideas like familiar locations, mysterious places, mood pieces, recurring locations, how to build them through concept and history. Who are the inhabitants? What are the details? What's the current situation? Whether or not you even need to map it. And then it talks about location, stunts, and mechanics. Now, we're going to talk a lot more about location, stunts, and mechanics when we get to the Layers book, Fantasy Age Layers. Location stunts, which I've talked about before, is one of my favorite things. Locations having totally unique stunts, a dangerously unstable building that's partially collapsing on characters, or having, we got on page 48, clearly an illustration of one of our characters kicking a troll into a pool of lava. Presumably he has a ring of invisibility as well. And so that's a great example of how set pieces, any action adventure set piece you can think of, can turn into location stunts. And that's a great way to look at a movie, even maybe a bad movie, and say, ooh, this one piece of this movie was cool, this one moment, maybe I can turn that into a location stunt, right? If you're watching a zombie movie, maybe you say, hey, maybe the horde of zombies aren't 52 individual monsters I put on the board. Maybe there are 3 major zombies, but they've got zombie stunts, and one of the zombie stunts is, hey, the horde tears you down. And so if you are on a square marked as a horde of zombie squares, the major foes have a horde of zombie stunt they can whip out for that encounter, even though you mostly are ignoring the 500 minor zombies that are shuffling along that grab at people slowly. They're a threat, but only in certain circumstances. So that's the sort of thing that I get really excited by when I see it in a book like this. And again, the chapter runs out with an example location, Eperia, which you can grab and use as is, or you can be inspired by to use as something to build for your own game. There's also a big old chart on businesses with things like how much is the price compared to list price, and what kind of business is it, and what are the details.
Sorry, I saw a shiny. What page are you on?
The charts begin on, for you, page 52.
52.
That's the businesses. And then if you start to scroll through,
Nice.
just lots and lots of the kind of random tables that when the players say, hey, I go to the tavern, does anything happen? And you're like, I don't know, let's roll 2d6 and find out. Hey, you notice one of the patrons has been sitting alone at a table for the entire time they've been there. But they've got a table with 2 glasses and they haven't drunk any of it. And that's just a little, bit of color. I like the names from some of these for the inns. We've got results like Nosy Neighbors and Isn't This My Room? Okay.
This is great.
Rolling on to page 56 for you, chapter 5, Building Characters, which does the old joke in the illustration of an alchemist who is very clearly building a character. That character is growing out of that big old cauldron of goo. I presume there's some gibbering involved.
I imagine so.
Certainly it is noisome and disquieting. So this talks about making interesting characters. And again, it's got some tables. If you want to go forward a few pages, you'll find random relationships table and tricks and traps of modding and converting characters, which I've talked about doing that before. Various roles. And, we're mostly talking about NPCs, right? You can, as a player, use this and say, hey, I'm going to take the lackey role for this character just because I'm bored. But again, you can look at the art of playing characters. I find that the most important for some people in this is the common pitfalls. If you're reading through this and you don't have those pitfalls, great, but be aware of them, because there's a whole group of people that feel like there should never be what sometimes people refer to as a GMPC, that is a character who is one of the adventurers and goes with them on adventures and does stuff. And they often feel that way because they've had an experience where the GM's character that travels with them, he likes them better than the players, and they're always hogging the spotlight, and everything is actually about watching the GM tell you how great his character is. And that's dull and a little insulting. and honestly, a tad masturbatory.
Clearly, yeah.
But I have at the same time had some characters that are useful under this narrow set of circumstances, or fill a gap that the player characters don't do well with, that the players really root for and get involved with. I had a group of characters look around at one point, player characters. The players said, you know what we really need is a guy with a big shield and lots of hit points. We are not doing well without someone to stand in front with a big shield and lots of hit points. So they went and hired someone, and he got food and board and a certain number of silver a day and a share of treasure. And they decided to adopt that character. So I made him someone who was not the smartest rock on the avalanche, and not particularly creative, and he's not going to come up with a solution to anything, and is very specifically an ethical mercenary, right? You all have hired me, so I'm, whatever the group decides, I'm here to support that. Burn down the orphanage? Great, we're going to do that. So he's not even a force for good, right? But he's someone who helped them, and they got super involved with, even when later they decided maybe they didn't need him. They were like, but if we let him go, someone else might hire him and have him do evil. So we're going to keep him with us, even though we could now summon ogres to do his job. We want to keep an eye on him.
I do want to say I'm feeling just a tad bit called out, but I also want to say the Murder Hobo Show stopped by and says, yo, my dudes, and then says 2nd edition is in the works, isn't it?
So let me talk about that briefly since they asked.
Yeah.
2nd edition is not in the works. What is in the works is, instead of the Fantasy Age basic rulebook, we're working on the Fantasy Age core rulebook. So it will be a new rulebook that has everything you need to play the game, and it will replace the basic rulebook. It should be 99% compatible with every other book, right? We are not necessarily going to be doing a revamp of every single book we've got. It may be time for a new bestiary because I've got new ideas on how to do it. There's stuff from layers we may want to do, etc. But you can take the core rulebook once it comes out and take any of our old adventures. You can take our old bestiary. You can take the book we're talking about now. You can take layers, which we'll talk about, I think, next week. And you can use it seamlessly with the new core rulebook. This is an attempt to do a quality of life improvement. So we've already told people we're doing a new core setting in it. So it's not going to be, and it's going to be a place from which you could get to Freeport, but it isn't Freeport. We have a new class, but having a new class doesn't change things. So the whole, and there are some things that we're doing differently, but if we told you that Fireball now does more damage, but it's still Fireball and you still get it and you can still cast it, that is compatible with every other book, because if we tell you a villain casts Fireball, they cast Fireball, and then you go back to the core rulebook to see how it works. So what I am wrenching around, and one of the reasons this is taking so much time, one of the reasons why we had a private playtest and then a public playtest, now more private playtests, is I want to get a book in the end that isn't rushed, that does everything we want it to do and inconveniences nobody. Now, I am aware I'm setting the bar way up here, and my nose is way down here, so I may drown. But that's the goal. We are not launching a new edition of the game. We're launching a new rule book, which you'll be able to take and use with anything. And then my hope going forward, and for one thing, I want to do a lot of adventure support. But when I do that adventure support, the idea is that you will be able, if we pick up an adventure and you prefer the basic rule book, you should be able to use your basic rule book for the new adventure. I may do a new monster book. I love monster books. We only have one. Pathfinder First Edition had 6, and that's just if you count the ones that are bestiary with a number after them. If you include everything, it's a bunch of monsters. So the plan is to give you something that will give you a better, broader, more polished experience, that gives you more options, that corrects some things that we feel we didn't do as well as we could have the first time around, but not to take away the ability to use anything you bought. We appreciate you buying it. Please keep using it. And we're trying to give you new stuff rather than make your old toys invalid.
I love that. And I think it's a thing too that I know that developers also have this sort of all of the things that have been created, to have to recreate them, you lose some stuff and all the great ideas. But I love this. This is a really great way to do it. And folks agree. And our friend that asked the question said, sweet, take my money. And my friend, we shall. Happy to do so. Chase says, Chase is here. See? Oh, another Chase encounter. Can't wait to check that out. that is awesome. Now, I am looking at Jason. I think Jason Waltman is actually designing a full adventure right now in chat. So we'll have to touch base with Jason. Instead of the zombies,
All the
and
orphans are now zombies by a spell gone wrong. Yeah,
right.
no,
Yeah, I love it. It's great. We're gonna do a little compendium of Jason stuff and just run a little adventure. But all right, so here we are. It's 2:51 already, Owen.
Yeah, I know. So let's hop to page 70, Building Rewards, Chapter 6. Again, I don't want to go into a lot of detail, and hopefully I won't get as sidelined as I have. This has a lot of interesting ideas about how to use rewards in your game, as well as how to generate rewards. So things like rewards as a goal, rewards as achievements, rewards as resources, unlocking rewards through training or bestowal, creating wars, honorifics, how honorifics might impact things. Like if you get the honorific goblin foe, you're a renowned foe of all goblin kind, and creatures take a -2 penalty on willpower morale tests against you, and you've got a bonus on perception tests involving goblinkin because of your knowledge of their ways. Now, of course, if you're a goblin foe and the goblins aren't the bad guys, which there's no reason the goblins have to be the bad guys, the honorific goblin foe might be a mixed blessing, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about memberships as covered in the Fantasy Age Companion and organizations and companions. So, and wealth and income and magic items. And there's some rewards tied to the adventure in the basic rulebook, which I think is a great way to handle that. And then there are some more random tables if you want to go to page 80. There's a 3d6 table for random magical properties, some of which are good, some of which are bad. It can be cursed. So if you're the sort of person that's never sure what you should be doing to make a magic item, we gave you a random table. Okay, Chapter 7, Building Monsters and Adversaries, starting on page 1.
Ooh.
You good?
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm just looking at this, whatever that is. That is awesome.
Yeah, that is a whatever cracking its way out of its giant whatever egg.
There's some gibbering on that day, I'll tell you.
There is some gibbering. There is no doubt there's some gibbering. There might also be squelching. This is the sort of scene that if I'm the GM, I will say that it sounds like someone is squeezing 20 gallons of cold macaroni and cheese through a 1-gallon nozzle.
Oh, you've just described my whole life.
Well, that does not particularly surprise me, Troy. I know you that well.
Hey, I do want to say this real quick. Michael McNeil says, so where do we get this awesome sounding book? Well, you pick that up in the you'll find it at the Green Ronin store, and we'll drop a link here in just a moment. But Owen, you do continue.
I will, but I want to tell you that on Facebook, we once again have stan art that's linked. So
I love this alert. We should get an alert noise.
Wait,
I love it.
That's a terrible noise, but
it's a good one for this. I mean, yeah. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave you here at this art while you kind of talk about building monsters, so I don't have to scroll through. I've got a couple things I need to grab.
Sweet. So monsters and adversaries, which you handle the same way. Talks about some monster subgenres. I don't always see people deal with that. It talks about choosing a threat level, assigning abilities based on the threat level. There's a lot of stuff here, like assigning specific ability scores. There's a lot of stuff here that I've had people say, the Fantasy Age basic rulebook just says, hey, you can make monsters, and that's not enough for me. I want some more guidance. Well, here is that more guidance. And there is, again, some awesome art, which you get to see some of it. Talks about traits, and then it has a example for extraplanar puppet masters, which tells you a little bit about where our headspace is when we're working on these books, because we went straight to extraplanar puppet masters. But if you're the sort of, and it discusses variant monsters and modification caveats, if you're the sort of person who constantly finds yourself thinking, what I really need is a werewolf who's a extreme threat, a major threat, and none of the werewolves are. This section will help you. If you can slide real quick to page 93, Troy, I want people to see that piece of art as well, because that is building the divine. And there are some very different images of gods on that illustration.
And as I understand it, if I'm to believe chat, and I'm always a believer in everything that a person says in chat, but this was the section that Rachel Cruz did. Is that right, Rachel?
Well, gosh, I hope so, because then I'll get to tell her how much I like it. I love this chapter. The fact that it talks about using real world inspiration or not, and how real are your deities and how present are your gods, the differences between gods and monsters, history as thematic inspiration, divine variations, atheism as a belief. There's a ton of great stuff about building religions and churches and believers and faiths all as somewhat different things. And then there again are some specific examples. And this is one of the best treatments of coming up with religions I have ever seen. And since you find them so fun, if you go to 105 Troy, there are some random charts for building religious structures and domains and gods, right? So, you can roll and discover that you've got a god of acting, the moon, and water, and their cult activities include interpretive dance, and their festival is body art.
You just described Burning Man.
Yeah, well, there you go, right? Entirely at random, we just described Burning Man, and I have no problem believing Burning Man as a religious cult activity, that maybe the cult drives it, and they're a little annoyed by the other people that come along, but once a year, there are people that go do, Burning Mannequin or whatever, and run out, and the construct, the Burning Wicker construct wars might have accidentally started with that.
I love it.
Are you ready to show people the stand art?
I am ready, but I want to grab a link real quick.
Okay.
And I can, let's see. Yes,
Yeah.
You know what? Let me do me a favor and vamp for just a moment while I.
No problem. I will cover building subgenres real quick, and we won't have to click to it. There are a lot of things you can do with Fantasy Age, and that you can do with a fantasy role playing game that may or may not go together, and may or may not be designed to go together. So, for example, if you are a fan of vampires and Lovecraft and gibbering, you may actually be wanting to run a fantasy horror game. And then if you just tell people, hey, I'm running a fantasy game, and they're all envisioning a Eastern martial arts fantasy with Wireworks and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, and the End of the Badlands television series, even though you're both talking fantasy, they may have a real disconnect. But also if people say, hey, I'm tired of fantasy, but what they are tired of is dungeon crawling, and you're wanting to do a mashup of swashbuckling fantasy and historical fantasy, they may not be tired of the thing you're doing where you're going to have, cavalrymen on velociraptors. So there's a lot of discussion of that. There's a piece of art on page 110, 111 for Troy that if you guys go to, gives me a very Thundar the Barbarian feel, and I love Thundar, so for me that's a good thing. But it also talks about genre and emulation rules, which is something that doesn't show up a lot in books, right? That it talks about how to change things by having renaming character traits or having magical powers that can corrupt people.
This art is amazing. That literally looks like my cat. So great.
And a big subgenre basically is epic. And that brings us to chapter 10, building epic campaigns, which, if you look at Celtic mythology, you've got people who in the legends, like throw 3 spears at someone, then jump up and run across the top of the spears, then kill the guy, then catch the spears they threw at him. That is not something that most role-playing games are designed to handle out of the gate. And so if you want a campaign of high-powered or godlike creatures, first of all, feel free to pick up the Fantasy Age Troy book. the Trojan War book, but also there are things in this chapter that will assist you. And then the book ends with some templates. So if you want to do a campaign map that'll keep track of the players and the campaign framework and the setting, there's some reward mapping and then the index. So
the Fantasy Age Troy book is also another book that's coming out soon, and I think that everyone will really enjoy it.
I'm sure it is.
It's all about me.
It's all about being disembodied.
That's right. Yeah.
If you ever wanted to play a disembodied character.
Yeah. And all the wacky trouble that I get into, it's so fun.
Stan said, I love the idea of building wicker figures that only come to life when you light them on fire. So that's
actually really cool. That's creepy and cool.
Okay, so we got through the whole book. I hope I've given you an idea of why this book is so exciting, and I hope Troy will give you an idea of where to get the book. I see that we've got a link. This is there have been a lot of books that I specifically say, hey, I really like having this book in print and PDF. This is actually not one of those. If you read or if you absorb information better one way or the other, I recommend getting it however you absorb information the best, because this for me is mostly a sitting around thinking, solving conceptual design problems kind of book. So
truth,
if you do best with a physical book, leaning back and reading it with a hot chocolate on a warm sunny day, feel great.
And we're actually just developing just an entire it's built out of smells. So if you absorb your information and you need to really, kind of olfactory scenario there, it will be a delight. But I do have something to share. Here it is. There we go.
So here we have the illustration with a spider with a fez, and there's a goblin pointing at it saying, hey, here's a goblin stats with weird art. And the spider responds, oh, who told you?
By Stan.
I'm not saying that I mentioned the spider would wear a fez in the hopes that Stan would draw it, because I love it when he draws fezzes, but I'm not saying I didn't do that either.
I love that. And Rachel Cruz, I think that you've just invented a whole new kind of business proposition.
Scratch and sniff RPG books.
Let's do that. I want to smell what that thing was coming out of the egg. I want to know it when I smell it.
To sniff dank, turn to page 43.
To sniff dank. I love it. So, wow, Owen, I feel like we have just run a marathon. And what a good time. What a lot of fun. Great guests in the chat, wonderful people, great feedback. I think this is one for the books. This one smells all right.
Well, in that case, turn to page 16. So that's where the tangerine is.
Oh, that's not a tangerine. Okay, hey, wait, hold on 1 second. Jason Wellman says, smells like battle. Real quick, a couple of things I want to tell you. I went and hung out with Ren on their, they have a podcast that they put together, and I messed with everybody and actually made some olfactory jokes there as well. Apologies, Ren. I can't control myself, but what a delightful community and group, and super, super fun. Ren, you should drop a link so that we can tout that. And then Ren says, you did. But also we have with us a Stan. That's what it is. Stan, Red says, you know what you did. I do. But Stan bought me a hamburger, like a real life in-person hamburger. It was really nice to hang out with Stan. So that was a lot of fun.
Did you get to talk to him about his Kickstarter he's running right now with art that's even cooler than spiders with fezzes?
We sure did talk about it, and Stan should drop a link as well. That's very true. Exactly.
That's Creatures and Competitions, a fantastic athletics art book on Kickstarter right now. It's coming up on its goal. It's got 15 days to go. So
nice. I got to get over there too. And this is Stanward. Give us Stanuel, Stanex. Drop us a link before we go, or we're just going to stay here all day. There we go.
There it goes. Newstandproject.com. Perfect.
Wow, that's a very easy thing to remember. But yeah, so it's like it's the compendium of a bunch of stuff that he's drawn. And
well, hey, John Lighthouser's here. Hi, John.
Hey, John. Good to see you, John. Yeah, what a great show. We are now 6 minutes past the hour, and what that means is that we have given you the 6 minutes we stole at the front end. As we do, we like to give you the full hour, so you don't feel cheated. Your money back if you do. Thanks to everybody who's been watching. Join us this Monday for Mutants and Masterminds Monday. We get to hang out with the developers of Mutants and Masterminds. It's a Starhaven. I almost said Stormhaven. Starhaven summer, which means we've been working with our Patreon to develop some plot points and such, and we're gonna have some cool stuff to show off. Maybe VTT related. I can't be sure. I'm only the person that coordinates the thing. So, Slit, I'm sorry. You know what? I'm glad you at least got a slice of this. As I like to say, as long as you show up, you're not late.
You got to see the spider and a fez, so that was the important part.
That's true, and you got to hear our voices and see Owen, and then you're still there, man. You made it. But with that, I say, Owen, unto you, thank you so much. What a great time this was. All of our chat folks, you are a absolute treasure. Enjoy the rest of your day as well, and we will see you again with Owen Casey Stevens and me, Disembodied Troy, here for ThursdAGE next Thursday. Thank you, everyone. Bye.